and welcome. You're tuning in to Unbreakable Hope with me, your host, Jessica Rose. This podcast is all about seeking the light. In each episode, we chat with someone who has either overcome the darkness or who is actively spreading light within their own community. So let's jump into today's episode. Today's guest is ShayLee Hunter, and we dive into some pretty great conversations about invisible disabilities, feeding tubes, bathrooms with ostomy bags. We talk about a lot, and she is such a beautiful, positive soul. I am excited to be able to share her story with you and just thrilled to learn more myself. And I hope you'll learn a thing or two as well. So join us as we talk to ShayLee, who is Mrs. Utah Petite. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to get to know you and learn more about your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to finally meet you and, get to be sisters.
Yes, it's amazing what the pageant world can do. I know there was a lot of people with like misconceptions, and it's been super fun. It's just a really awesome way to network with like-minded women. So I'm really excited, and I want to pass it over to you and kind of open up the floor and let you introduce yourself a little bit, and we'll jump into this conversation. I'm super excited about.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I am ShayLee Hunter. I am Mrs. Utah Petite, and my platform is all about invisible awareness for invisible disabilities. So, pretty much, I was born with a chronic invisible condition that deals with my intestinal tract. And so now I just want to represent people with feeding tubes, ostomy bags, and just bring um, awareness, but yet also like just talk about it, like try and end those stigmas, stereotypes, anything of that nature. I feel like it just isn't a topic that is discussed a lot or is, really popular in the media. So I just want to be that awareness advocate on the media.
I love that so much. And you have a picture of getting your headshots done. And I remember seeing your port. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got to talk to this girl because my husband has a peg tube, and I think maybe that's probably a great place for us to start. Is what exactly is a feeding tube? And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that because when my husband got his, made me they led me to believe that it was quite common, and I'm finding out that it's actually not maybe as common as they made it out to be.
Yeah, so I got my first feeding tube when I was 2 years old, and I've been on and off feeding tubes pretty much my whole life. So there's a couple different types of feeding tubes. So there's a feeding tube that can go down your nose into your digestive tract. There's one that can go through your abdominal wall. And then there's one more like a permanent IV is how I refer to it. And that's the type that I have. So mine is through my veins. It goes actually into my heart. And so I get fed that way with pretty much sterilized nutrition that keeps me alive since my intestines can't absorb anything.
I think that's a really great example of the differences in them. So my husband he had the one up the nose, which I'll be real, when he was in ICU and they told me they're gonna put in a feeding tube, my mind was like, oh, it's like gonna go down his throat. I don't know. They're just gonna
Yeah.
like put a funnel and chug, 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 right? And then when they're like, it's going up his nose, I was like, say what? Uh,
Yeah.
and then I thought back to the Little Rescuers movie. I don't know if you've seen it where they're like in the cave and they're trying to get this diamond out of the skull. So I was just imagining like the skull and the diamond stuck in there and like, how are they going to get this tube in there? And then of course they go to the stomach. And I just like, I was left with so many questions. And then they told me it was best if I wasn't in the room when he had to put in and that I needed to leave the
Yeah.
room. But I actually had to finish pulling it out the first time.
Okay.
Started to pull it out, but only got like halfway and panicked, and it was on suction mode. So then I panicked because I was like, I don't know where this is at. I couldn't
Yeah.
tell the nurse they were in another room, so I was like, crap. The only other thing I know how to do is just pull it out the rest of the way. I don't know. I didn't
They're
feel comfortable.
very uncomfortable. So I will say that they are not very comfortable at all. I'm like, it's hard to sleep with them in. I've had every type of feeding tube. So I can relate to anybody who's had a feeding tube in whatever form or fashion, but they are Lifesavers, but they are not for the weak. I will tell you that.
That is interesting. That was going to be one of my questions is have you had all those? Because my husband's only ever had the two. He's had the one up the nose, well, twice. So I guess he's had two up the nose. And then he has the one in his abdomen right now, which they actually did through IR, not GI, because he's a neuropatient. So we have to minimize how much anesthesia he gets.
Yeah, a lot of the ones through the abdominal wall can be placed in IR, especially if it's bypassing your stomach and they're trying to put it directly into your intestine. So people that have like gastroparesis and delayed stomach emptying will often have like a GJ tube or a J tube that's just in the bowel itself, that so it's bypassing the problem, right? And it's getting to the right place that can absorb the right nutrition.
That it's so fascinating. This is definitely not my area of expertise, and it's stuff that I've just had to learn along the way because there was no training. They're just like, here you go home with this peg tube and figure it out. So you've had one since 2 years old. So you really don't know a life without one. What are some of the questions you get asked the most about it?
I think, I wear my backpack so I can be mobile with my medication, so I can go to work, school, wherever, And, it's just like this tubing that has white liquid in it typically. And a lot of people are just like, oh, so you have diabetes. And I'm like, no, I don't. Just because you see tubing does not mean it automatically is diabetes. So I think that's like just the misconception. Like people just don't know. It's something very uncommon, even though people think it's common, right? Um, that tubing equals diabetes, just because diabetes is more acceptable, more diverse in society. A lot of people know about that illness and how that's managed, where a lot of people don't understand intestinal diseases and how that's managed or how, people take care of themselves that way. And so I think that's just my biggest thing with like carrying around a backpack with medication. People are like, oh, you got diabetes. I'm like, but I love educating people. I love when people ask me about my health or ask me about, when they see my feeding tube in pictures or when I'm out in public wearing something, or if they see my ostomy bag and they're like, oh, well, what's that? And I'm like, oh, hey, like, let me educate you real fast. Like, it's not something bad. I'd, much rather have people come up to me and ask me questions and learn something and educate themselves than just assume or just stare at me. Like, it's okay if you're curious, if you literally just want to stare and look, like, great. But if you don't know what it is and you're staring, like, learn something. Take a moment, just learn something.
I think that's so important is humans were naturally curious, right? But you're right. There's so many times we'll just like stare and like look at like we don't know what it is, but we're too afraid to ask questions. I try and encourage that a lot of people with my husband's condition, especially when we're out. Bless his heart. His mother was here recently and we went shopping and unfortunately my caregiver was sick and my husband wanted to get out of the house anyway, so I was like, we're going to a makeup store. And he's like, okay. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, we're going to Ulta, like a
Yeah.
mega makeup store. Okay. Like, I don't know what fun you think you're going to have here.
Yeah.
And it was tight. So for people listening who've been to Ulta, like just the tight turns and the, Christmas gifts were out, so there's all these just everywhere, things everywhere, and trying to navigate and turn and turn and turn. And there was some little kids just kind of staring. And I'm like, yeah, he's in a wheelchair. And I think like wheelchairs are pretty common. But I feel like we get that look a lot too, is like, oh, like what's wrong? And um it's not like you wear a sign on you that says, hey, I have this going on, but you do have things like you said you carry with your backpack. How does that affect your mobility or traveling?
Traveling is really hard. So I have to carry in all my medication with me if I go and travel, and it has to be refrigerated. So if I'm getting on a plane, I usually take my carry-on. I take all my bags of, it's called TPN, and I put them in like these cooler bags, and then I put them in my suitcase, and then obviously it's really heavy, and I have a duffel bag with all my supplies, and I get a lot of people that complain about if I have more than a certain number of bags because I have to carry all my medical stuff with me. Like it can't get lost, it can't get damaged because it's not easily replaceable. And so that all has to be with me. And so typically I have 3 bags with me, and a lot of people will not let me on planes with 3 bags. And I'm like, it's all medical. Like, trust me. Like, do I have to open up? Do I have to show you? Like, where, like, do you think I'm lying? Like, I don't understand why people don't believe just me saying like, hey, this is all medical. Like, but then I also look at it from their point of view and I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably looking at this 26-year-old young, beautiful thing who does not look sick at all. They can't see my feeding tube. They can't see my ostomy bag. They can't see all, this medical history. And they're looking at me with 3 bags and they're probably like, oh, she's probably just carrying a bunch of shoes and clothes and makeup and she didn't want to pay to check it. And I'm like, that's not the case. And so like, it's that stigma. I've never had issues with TSA and Salt Lake City, so that's always been a blessing in disguise. They're super sweet, really efficient. I've never had to go like really early or anything like that. It's usually just the carry-on aspect of trying to get my medication somewhere. But it is hard by myself when I'm traveling. So I typically like to travel with somebody else just to help me with the luggage aspect of things, especially because of the weight and everything, and me trying to get in an Uber or wherever I'm going. It's just a lot for one person. Um, but it's doable. It's very doable if you set your mind to it. I typically don't fly a lot. I don't travel a lot. Um, but road trips are always fun. I can put a cooler in my back seat or the trunk and throw my medicine in there and drive wherever I need to drive, and it's great. I can fill up, as we get gas, more ice on my medication, and it's usually fairly awesome that way. But the airport is a little bit trickier than that. But for the most part, I mean, my health does not keep me from traveling at all. If I had more money, that would be a different story, but I don't.
I agree. I love traveling and I travel a lot for work, but it'd be nice to be like, oh, I can just travel whenever I want to, wherever I want to. And I think a lot of people they don't know the TSA rules. Like even as my husband's condition has changed over the years and it's just this constant like up and down, I've had to look and say, okay, what is it? And I learned about the bags, if it's medical, that you can have it as a carry-on through one of our rowers. He has, he's that guy who has like 5 carry-ons
I love
because of
that.
all the medical stuff that he carries. And bless his heart, he's always like a hot mess. Somehow all of his stuff always has to be like double scanned or inspected and wiped. And uh, I feel for him every time he travels. It's like, oh man, he's about to get stuck. Like we're gonna be here for a while. And it's nice to have that. But like you said, invisible disabilities, that's something my husband and I battle a lot. Before his brain cancer came back and it got worse, people used to always say like, "Oh, you're a disabled vet. What's wrong with you?" And he would take off his hat. He was hair short. He'd take off his hat and he would point to his scar and say, "Oh, brain cancer." It's funny how judgmental people are. So, like you said, oh yeah, sure, I'm young. I don't look sick. Clearly it's just things that she has. It's not medical supplies. And I think that it's not something that you should have to like label your bags like this is all medical stuff. Leave me alone. But I'm sure you get that oftentimes where you're almost like, I just wish that there was like a label on here and people would leave me alone.
Yeah, and I'm like, even if I did put a medical sign, because I have like these little, like I put the air tags on all my bags too, and I
Mm,
have like a thing that's around my air tags that say it's medical, but it's not like, a big sign that's like, this is medical, but it's still like, come on, guys, like I shouldn't have to prove myself worthy of being disabled. Like, do I have to prove myself disabled? Like, do I have to bring a doctor's note? Like, but it just, it goes to say that people have, taken advantage of that
mm,
and they've utilized that in ways that they shouldn't have that make it harder for people who are disabled to utilize those things. A big thing this last year, especially on social media, was Disneyland getting rid of their disability passes because people were utilizing them wrongly. And so now it is anybody who has like autism or a mental disability can get a disability pass through Disney, but nobody else can. And so that's frustrating for me because as somebody with an ostomy bag, I have to empty my ostomy bag, you know, I can't control that, but like hourly. And if I want to go to Cars Land and wait in Cars Land for a 3 hour ride, I can't do that. And so, the disability pass gives me the opportunity to like, go utilize the bathrooms while holding a spot in line that is 3 hours long. Like it's not about me not wanting to wait in line. It's the fact that what do you want me to do if I have to empty a bag? Like, do you want me emptying it in Cars Land on the side of the wait line? I'm like, or do you want me to empty it in the trash right there? I'm like, that's kind of discriminatory towards me though, as somebody who doesn't have that accessibility. That like, what am I supposed to do? Like, wait and then go on Cars Ride with a full ostomy bag and hope it doesn't pop all over the ride? Like, I'm sure that would be a living nightmare for not only me, but the people around me if that's the case. Like, I'm like, honestly, I kind of want to just do it to prove a point at this point because I'm like, I don't think you guys are taking this seriously at all.
I I was literally thinking that. I was like, I could see my husband being that person that's like, all right, fine, we'll see how this goes. Won't end well in your favor.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
shut down the ride.
Could you imagine like this ride is down for maintenance?
Honestly, if I lived near a Disneyland and could get a pass just for like all year to prove a point, because obviously I don't live there, I don't have a seasonal pass, but so like if I go, like I gotta make the most of my one trip, right? But if I had the opportunity to do that, I would go every day, and I would somehow prove to them to shut down this ride of like getting my ostomy, doing all the things and having them have to shut it down. And they'd probably be like, what is this girl doing? And I'd, go back every day and I'd go through the same cycle until they'd be like, okay, she probably needs a disability pass or something because I think it is just outrageous that they took this as just a mental disability. Like I understand that, but most of their rights they're not even accessible for wheelchairs either. And they claim that they are, and I'm like, they're not. So I'm like, I don't know who's in charge of this, but I was like, obviously it's not somebody who's ever had to live with a disability.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of rules and regulations are made by people who have never had to follow them. And I agree. I went to Disneyland and Disney World. So I ran away from home for my birthday. Long story short, but I went to Disneyland and then I ended up at Disney World for work. And while we were there, I'm a adaptive sports coach. So I'm there with a lot of the other coaches and athletes and stuff. And I'm with a lot of guys who have amputees. Or guys who are amputees or guys in wheelchairs and stuff. And it was interesting because even some of the rides that were like, oh yeah, here's this quick lane you can go through. Great, there's no steps. Still a little sketch to get in and out of, but a lot of it was like, oh, you can transfer yourself, right? Like, uh, what? And one of the guys I was with, yeah, he just hops all over the place. No big deal. But I watched him and I thought, my husband couldn't do that. There's no way my husband could do that. And every time we got on a ride, I thought more and more about it. I was like, oh, he couldn't do that one. He couldn't do that one. He couldn't do that one. So, yeah, it's interesting once I call it like, like the 10%, right? Is that it's not common, it's not an everyday thing. So I don't always get mad when we go to a door and there's no button to push open and it's like super heavy. I get frustrated in the moment.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Ah," right? But then I'm like, what are we going to do? That is, we're the 10%. We're not your everyday person. And as long as people are nice about it, I can be nice about it. But if people are going to be rude to me about it, I can also, like you said, can be rude.
Yeah.
Maybe test some things.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing, is bathroom accessibility. Like a lot of the places, like if I'm walking in an outdoor mall, like most of these places will not let me use their bathrooms. I have to go to the main bathrooms. Like, so if I'm in a store looking at stuff and I needed to use the bathroom, I literally have to go out of the store. If I have items or whatever it is, I have to leave them there. I have to go clear across, find the bathrooms. If there's a line, wait in line and do that. And I'm like, it just like, it's frustrating because I'm like, I know you guys have a bathroom. And it's not like I'm like, here's still toilet paper or, like ruin your bathroom in any way. I'm like, it will literally take me less than 2 minutes. but it's like a policy for a lot of places. Or like if you're not a customer, you can't use the bathroom. And I'm like, okay, well, do you want this outside in your trash can? Or do you want it in the bathroom where it's supposed to go? Because I'm like, at this point, like, I'm not gonna go to like if I'm road tripping, I'm not gonna go to every gas station and buy something just for you to let me utilize the bathroom. Like, I don't know. I just find it like really ridiculous that bathrooms are now not accessible to everybody. Like, I find that really odd. Like, I feel like a bathroom should be accessible to everybody at any time that they need it.
I agree. It's such an odd thing. Like when you go somewhere and I've been in a store before, I'm like, oh shoot, gotta go, And then I go all the way back to the bathroom and it's like, oh, go to the front of the store, see an associate, sign out the wooden paddle that has the key attached to it. I'm like, what? Here's my thing. I have a hard time accepting, or I guess because it's like a core belief, right? I have a hard time accepting the negative in humanity. Like it's there, right? I acknowledge it's there. I just have a hard time accepting it. So when I think about this ginormous wooden paddle that I now have to like rush myself back to the bathroom to unlock the door to go to the bathroom, I think, what happened that now this key has to be a wooden paddle and you have to sign it out at the front store? Like what goes on in this store that had to be a thing?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, you're completely right. Like obviously there's been something that's happened that's put these, rules in place that, are obviously obstacles for people with disabilities and it's like it's obvious I don't feel like it's our fault. If somebody that had a disability ruined bathroom accessibility, please let me know and I will talk to them. Like, but I also just don't feel like that's like if we need something as somebody who's disabled, I don't feel us like taking advantage of that or ruining that. Like for us, because I'm like, obviously we need that accommodation. Like, why would we go about ruining it if we need that?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like one bad apple ruins it for everybody. But then at what point did the clothes iron have to put on the warning label, don't iron while wearing, right?
Yeah.
Like I think about stuff like that. But bathroom accessibility is definitely probably my biggest challenge with my husband, being able to get him mobility. So he does not have an ostomy bag, but he is incontinent. So the problem I have is like when he goes, he goes, sometimes he knows, sometimes I have to notice. But getting him in and out of the bathroom, I have to physically lift him up and transfer him. And I remember we were traveling one time and I go and there's like either the family bathrooms or like the disability bathrooms. And I go and it's like, oh, out of order. I'm like, oh my gosh. So then I go into the women's normally. That's my first go-to. I try and go in the men's like last resort, at least give them some privacy, right? If I go in the women's and it's like, oh, the disability stall here is it's down. Or somebody, I once heard this, and I'm probably gonna like strike a nerve with a lot of people. But one of the places that I worked, they said the disability stall was reserved for pooping. And I thought, uh, no, it's reserved for people who need the extra space, who need the
Yeah.
grab bars, who
Yeah.
want to be able to get a chair in there. And I just remember the person telling me that. I was like in a group. So they weren't like talking, they were talking about it and like the whole group like kind of agreeing. So I don't know if this is some like unofficial unwritten rule,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm gonna need that to stop.
No, seriously. If that is a rule, like, and people, I feel like people just say things when they don't know they're a mixed company. Like, because just here in Utah, like, 1 in 4 people in Utah have a disability. So if you break that down, I'm like, that's crazy. Like, so you probably know somebody, or your brother knows somebody, or your mom knows somebody. Like, you know somebody with a disability. Whether you recognize that or not, you know somebody with a disability. And so watching the way that you talk around whoever you're with is really important. And I don't think people like notice those things, like I've, been in conversations too at work where I'm like, hey, that's probably not the best thing to say right now. Like, as somebody who has an ostomy bag, like, maybe not. So it's also like I have to stand up for myself in a lot of conversations just because people say things that they don't realize, like they're like, oh, I just wish, like I didn't have to eat or do this, or I wish I was skinny. And I'm like,
Mm.
as somebody who does not have working intestines, I think you should take that back. Like, I would much rather have the ability to eat and maintain my nutrition at all times than be upset over, you know, what I eat when you're the person who's eating. Like, control yourself, And I'm not saying that like is in any rude way. Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand that. Like, I've never been in a place where I understand what it's like to control what I'm eating and what I'm not eating because I've always had issues with eating. So I can't speak to that, but at the same time, I'm like, to me, it seems easy. Like, to just eat and be normal living that way. But I don't know. I mean, this is my battle, but I just hate when people make comments about food or things like that.
I think it's all about our perspective and like what we've been through in life. So like you've had these feeding tubes since you were two. You don't have knowledge other way. And a lot of other people, I used to hear comments all the time like, oh, you must eat like a bird, or oh this or oh that. And I'm like, there's a lot that goes into to weight, but I'm like, I also eat relatively healthy and I also work out. And like it's not like, I'm sure well, not like I'm sure. Like I know I have good genetics. My parents look like they found the fountain of youth. Like no one could ever guess their age if you saw them on the streets. So I'm blessed in that department for sure. But that's not the only thing. And it's funny when people, we're all going to joke about everything, right? Like, but to be able to use that as a way to raise awareness or say, oh, hey, it would be nice to like veg out and be able to eat a sleeve of Oreos every night for my midnight snack or whatever, is sometimes that people are like, oh shoot, yeah, like I didn't think about that. And
Yeah.
I spin it a lot in the suicide world is like when people will say things like, "Oh my God, I just want to kill myself." I'll look at him and I'm like, "But did you? Did you really?" And normally they'll respond like, "Oh, I shouldn't joke about that." I'm like, "I mean, you could joke about it, but I'm still going to take what you say seriously. I'm going to ask you if you're okay." Right? That's kind of how it
100%.
works. So I love being able to utilize that and say like, "Hey, I wish I could eat. I wish I could have this and that, but I can't." And I'm sure you get that a lot too, like with the judgment of, oh, must be nice to be so thin.
Yeah, the body dysmorphia definitely comes into play. Like, I've had the majority of my intestines removed. I've had a gastric sleeve done. So, like when you don't have organs that should be in your stomach, you look a little thin. Like, my hip bones kind of, stick out a little bit because I just don't have that extra organ there pretty much. That is a big organ. Like, I don't think people understand how big and large your intestines are. I'm pretty sure they say they stretch up to like a couple yards or so, like completely out. And so, I grew up and I still have people that just look at me and they're like, "Wow, you're so thin. Like, what's your workout? What do you do? Like, why are you so thin? Like, yeah, you eat like a bird or, things like that." And I'm like, "Actually, I'm on a 3 organ transplant list because I had my intestines removed and I have a feeding tube because my organs did not work." And then, they're like, "Oh." I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe don't say things to people that you don't know or you don't know their story because comments like that, like, can kind of be rude. Like, I know we've talked about fat shaming, but I think, we need to talk about like
Hmm.
skinny shaming too. I'm like, just because
Yeah.
I'm thin and my life doesn't mean that it wasn't hard or it's just easy peasy. And I was, born with a beautiful thin body. Like, I honestly, my question my entire life has been like, if I didn't have my intestinal disorders, like, would I be as thin as I am? Would I be as little as I am because I really stunted my growth too with not getting the proper nutrition that I needed growing up. And so, there's always those thoughts in the back of my mind like, would I look the same way I do today if I didn't have these, health problems?
Yeah, that's a definitely good point. I remember I was talking to somebody about like it's okay to compliment people. And I think I actually did a video about someone saying like, "Oh, you must eat like a bird." I'm like, or you could compliment somebody and say like, wow, you really put a lot of work into taking care of your body, right? It looks different. So I had a guy comment back and he said, I will never compliment somebody ever again. I will keep my nose to myself because he told a guy that he worked with, he said, hey man, looking really good, like losing some weight, going to the gym. And the guy said, no, I have cancer. It's the chemo. And he felt awful because he didn't look, like you said, like didn't look sick, right? But he was like, I was trying to compliment this guy. I thought he'd been putting in all this hard work and doing well. He's like, and then I felt like the smallest person on earth. And I kind of like, I don't know that I know the person who left the comment. I don't know the person he was talking to, but I kind of imagine like, man, I wonder what this person looked like and how many times
Yeah.
maybe he got that compliment. And it's like, oh man, it is kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of a gray area, but I think there is ways that I would say like are better to approach than other ways. Like the whole like, wow, you must never eat, or I'm sure you get this a lot too, because I've heard this all growing up as well. It's like, you just need to eat a couple hamburgers. Like,
Yeah, like you need to eat more. And I'm like, well, actually, I can't eat because it doesn't do anything. But thank you. Thank you. I'm like, or I think I hate when people assume like that they can fix you as well. Like just because I have intestinal problems, a lot of people are like, well, it's your diet. It's your diet. Like, what if you have you tried this diet? Have you tried taking out gluten or are you lactose intolerant? Or, like they come up with these crazy assumptions of like, oh, well, if you did it my way, you wouldn't have these problems. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna stop you there. My muscles and my intestine don't work. So no diet is gonna fix a muscle that doesn't work. The medications don't work. The surgeries don't work. I was like, you can't fix something that's paralyzed, but thank you. Thank you for, all your herbal teas, all your doTERRA oils, like whatever you want to throw at me. And I get that a lot on
mm,
my social medias as well. Like just random salespeople that are like, messaging me or commenting on my photos and they're like, oh, if you try this, like you'll be cured. And I'm like, if only I had thought of that, like when I was 6 months old. Like, sorry guys, sorry I didn't take your oil when I was 6 months old. Could have, cured that intestine right away. Like, I'm like, do you guys even know? Like, read my profile? Do you even like do digging through like I'm all about promoting your product, but maybe do a little bit digging on the person that you're promoting it to before you just go promote it. Because if you don't understand somebody's story, how can you ask them to try your product if like you don't know it's gonna work or not? Like it baffles me.
oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's definitely a good one. I with my husband, I'll definitely say no one ever tries to claim that they can cure. Well, I say no one, there's a couple people, but that they can cure his brain cancer, his radiation necrosis, or uh, he's a collector of terminal and life-threatening illnesses. So we recently had an appointment, and this happens all the time. What's his prognosis? It's like my favorite question to be asked because then I lean in and I'm like, he was supposed to die 10 years ago. And then normally there's like but this doc, it was actually a really cool conversation because I think I just went into the room immediately and said, look, here's the deal. My husband's got brain cancer. He's got radiation necrosis. Yes, those are both terminal. I recognize that, but he's in pain. He's having these issues. So either we can continue this conversation, you can help me figure this out and treat him, or we can go ahead and leave because let's just cut to the chase. Right? I'm like, boom, boom. But when he went through the conversation, he asked me about it, and I said that, and then he was like, sounds about right. And I said, well, a certain, I don't publicly say their name, but a certain cancer place told my husband that he had 3 months to live about 2.5 years ago. And they said that there's nothing more that they could do, and I was wasting my time. So I usually bring that up. And then I also bring up the fact that, yeah, my husband's had bilateral PEs, so blood clots in both lungs within an inch from the heart, and he passed both of them with no complications.
Yeah.
So anytime anyone's like, oh, what's the prognosis? Oh, what's the treatment? And I'm like, there isn't any. There is no treatment for my husband's conditions. Um, but I also bring it back as an opportunity, like you've used in your situation, right? Is my husband always said that we're guaranteed two things, to be born and to die, and
Yeah.
everything in between is up to us. So that's the part that we're making it work. And the more people throw stuff at you, it gets tiring, I'm sure, especially because you've been dealing with this your whole life now. My husband's had cancer for like 15 years, but there was a good time span where he was fine, and then it came back, and the last 4 years have been the roughest medically. But I'm sure it's exhausting. You probably have almost like a standard copy and paste response to these people.
Typically, yeah, I feel like, they ask you your story and I'm like, well, this is the Cliff Note version. Let me know if you want any more details on anything else. I'm like, I've had this. This is the major surgeries I've had. Like, I've probably had over 50 surgeries. So I'm just gonna pick my top five major ones and let you know about them. Because at the end of the day, I'm like, these surgeries don't matter after I got my ostomy surgery because like I have an ostomy, so that's fine. I'm like, tried that, didn't work, tried that, didn't work. It's you get used to it. And I was very fortunate that, my parents really let me advocate as a kid too. So like we took turns, like usually in the ER, you have to talk to the nurse. You gotta talk to the doctor. You gotta talk to the like medical student. You gotta talk to whatever person they bring in too. So, like you're seeing multiple people while you're in the ER. So my mom's like, you take one, I'll take one. Like you tell them, I tell them, So, we always switched off because it was exhausting for just one person to tell them the story over and over again. Or, she really set me up to be able to do a lot in my life as well. A lot of my doctors, told me that I would never even live as long as I have today. Um, they told me, I probably should have just been homeschooled and I probably would never, graduate from college or work a full-time job or be married or do any of these things. And my mom was like, no. Like, my daughter is very social. She's very capable. She's very smart. Like, if she wants to do it, she's going to do it. And I'm not going to hold her back. I'm not going to tell her that her illness is going to hold her back either. Like, I'm going to support her the best way that I can. And so, I was able to go to school, public school. My mom was very adamant that I was not being homeschooled. She did not want to homeschool me at all. But, I wanted to be on the cheer team and do the activities that my school offered, like musical theater, guitar class, like all these things. And my mom was like, okay, that's fine. But if you want to be a part of something, whether that's a cheer team or a theater production or whatever it is, she was like, you're committing to more than just yourself. You're committing to an entire cast, an entire cheer team. She's like, they're counting on you. So even on those hard days where you may not feel good, where you just want to lay in bed or whatever it is, like if you have a performance or if you have, a game to be to perform or a competition or whatever it is, you're going and you're going to show up and you're going to do the best you can. And I was like, okay, like you got it. Like I really understood that. And like it was really hard. I will tell you, it was really hard. There was, times in cheer where we actually had to order two different size skirts for me. One when I was like really sick and one when I was like really bloated due to my stomach. And so I had two different cheer skirts for my uniform. And my mom was happy to pay for two different skirts because she was like, well, you're gonna go whether you're sick or not. So she was like, you gotta have two different cheer skirts. So I had these two different cheer skirts and um I went, I showed up at practice. I stayed after school for practice, whatever it was. I mean, there was one time I was at cheer tryouts and I totally pooped myself at cheer tryouts and I still had to continue my tryout because I was like, well, that happened. It's okay. Like I took care of it. I came back. I finished the tryout because I was like, I want to be a part of this team. Like, I don't think anybody knows I pooped myself at cheer tryouts, but I did in junior high, and it was like the most embarrassing thing of my life. I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows that. So I might have just like outed myself right now. But I'm like, there were hard times. I'm like, there were hard times. I'm like, I still do musical theater to this day, and there, are times where I don't feel good, and I still go and I perform. Is it my best performance? No, but people are counting on me, and
Mm.
that's just life. I'm like, I work full time too, and my company's really great about if I'm sick or, need days off or whatever it is. But like, I know when other people are out at work that I have to pick up their slack. And so I understand if I'm out, they have to pick up my slack. And so, I really try not to just take sick time unless I really need it because it it's hard to put all those extra things on other people just because you're sick. And so I think, taking that responsibility of like, when is enough, but also like, when can I, kind of push myself and just get through the day.
I think those are very valuable life lessons that your mom was able to instill in you at such a young age because it is like you were hit heavy with the deck of cards that you were given, but you have such a beautiful spirit and such a positive attitude about it that it's really refreshing and empowering because I think it's a lot about mindset, right? Being mentally prepared because if you're not, I mean, I could wake up every day and woe is me, and this is a terrible life, and all of these terrible things that happen to me, and all these terrible things that happen to my husband, and I hate everything. But I could choose to train my brain to focus on the positive and just be like, hey, this is my life, and how are ways that I can live with what I've been given? And I think that you have such a beautiful soul to be able to advocate for people who have similar conditions and being able to say there are invisible disabilities. It's not just me, it's not just my disabilities. It's just things that make my life different, right? You mentioned being on a organ transplant list. Are you still on that list? And what is that experience like? Um, Getting on that list, being on that list? I'm sure that's a whole nother ball game.
It is. So, why I'm on the transplant list is because the feeding tube that I have and being on like TPN, which is the medication that keeps people alive who, have to have that IV nutrition, ruins your liver. And if you have to have these permanent IVs in, there comes the blood clots, there comes the accessing, and, like they break. They're not a permanent thing at all. And so then you have to replace them often. And a lot of times people lose access. Their veins, aren't as good. I don't know if anybody's ever had an IV, but if you've had an IV and you've had a lot of them, your veins start to disappear. So it's hard when it comes down to if you can't get the proper medication to keep you alive, what do you do next? So, since being on a feeding tube since I was 2, that's 24 years of my life. I've had a lot of lines. I've been through a lot of, I've had blood clots, I've had blood infections, I've had these things that, have created me to lose access. And so, due to that, I've qualified for a 3 organ transplant list through Nebraska Medical Center. I did all the testing just to make sure that one, my body could accept the organ transplant, like I'm not too sick or too far in my prognosis that, it wouldn't take. Also, like, making sure that, yes, I am losing access. Yes, I do have, the right conditions to qualify for that. It was pretty simple. I took like a week of testing. It wasn't super hard or anything, but we're just kind of in limbo right now. I'm not like active on a list. I can be active at any point. I've just qualified for it. So I personally, as somebody who, is in my 20s, I'm finishing my master's degree. I got married 2 years ago. I'm doing all these things. I personally just didn't want to add transplant to the mix. I was like, my quality of life really changed when they removed most of my intestine. So before then, I was in and out of the hospital a lot, and then they removed all but 20 centimeters of my intestine, and I haven't really been in the hospital since. So that was a fix for me in my health. It didn't change much. It just changed the fact that I wasn't in the hospital having to have clean outs or my intestines untwisted and, going into surgery for that. Prolapses with my ostomy, there were a lot of things like that that I'm not dealing with anymore, especially like the pain and stuff. But I think the biggest thing is that, it isn't a fix all, even a transplant. Like it's not a guarantee, it's not a fix. It's just, something else that may help prolong your life. So I think that's what people misconceptualize about intestinal transplants is like, even though I can have an intestinal transplant, that doesn't mean that I'm gonna walk away cured. It doesn't make it that I'm not going to have to ever have treatments ever again. Like I'm still going to have to take, transplant medication. I'm going to have a lot of follow-ups. And on top of that, like it could totally reject. I don't think people know this, but like with the heart, like that's a lot easier because it doesn't have as many blood vessels as an intestine does. So intestines, like when you're thinking of like a whole intestine, like that's a much bigger organ than a heart. So it has a lot of blood vessels and things like that. So you have to take more immunosuppressants to help accept that organ. And so trying to manage that is a lot more difficult than a heart transplant or something else, especially if you do an intestinal transplant plus like the liver and the pancreas, which usually take better in an intestinal transplant. So you're not even just thinking about one organ here, you're thinking about three organs and trying to manage all three organs with the transplant medications for acceptance. And that's just acceptance. That's not even like trying to make sure they work or that you can get the proper nutrients afterwards because who knows? Like you could still have intestinal problems after that. So it's a lot and it's a long recovery too. Like transplants are not an easy thing. Like it's at least 3 months in the hospital and close follow-up for at least a year. And, even just healing from one surgery is a lot. And so I personally just don't want to do that unless that is my last resort. Um, because I want to live in my 20s. Like
Mm.
I don't want to be dealing with, you know, transplant rejection or healing and trying to navigate that life when I'm trying to navigate my life in general. I'm like, I can't even imagine adding that. So I'm like, I'm glad I didn't go through with that route at that time when I did qualify because I wouldn't have met my husband. I wouldn't have the job that I have at the DV shelter that I work at. And I wouldn't have, been graduating with my master's this fall. Like, so I feel like, other people may take that opportunity and run with it. And that's great. But, I am closely watched by my doctors and my liver enzymes are watched because that's another reason why a lot of people have transplant is because your liver gets damaged too. So, we work really closely with my doctors on access points and liver functions too. Because if that starts tanking, we'll definitely, put me on that list and go that route. But until then, I'm just kind of waiting, living life, you never know what's around the corner or, just with medical advances, like who knows what they'll come up with in the next 5, 10 years. I'm like, there's new medications all the time. There's new treatment options. So I'm like, let's just ride this life out as best as we can.
That's a great point. Things are always advancing and changing. Like, I don't know, I'm gonna have to like Google where how long have organ transplants even been around? Um, you have just that little bit has taught me so much because the most I know about organ transplants is from the movie Johnny Q and good old Denzel. But I know somebody who had an organ transplant, but it's like that's my friend's now husband, so I didn't really know him that well and haven't had that conversation, but it's something that I've always found interesting. I've been on the other side of the organ transplants. I used to manage an ID card center when I was active duty, so I have to ask people like, "Hey, would you like to be an organ donor?" And then having those conversations where there's the people who are like, "Government conspiracy, they're gonna kill me off because I selected to be an organ donor," and then my opinion is like, "Hey, if it can benefit somebody else and save another life, so be it, right? I don't know what that looks like. I'm not gonna need it. You know, it's like the Egyptians, they didn't need them either, right? They took them out. So
Yes.
that's so it's so interesting and eye-opening a lot of what you've shared, even for the work that I do and working with people with disabilities as an adaptive sports coach, you know, my own husband's condition and stuff. A lot of this I didn't even know about. So I think it's very refreshing to be able to have this conversation. And I think it's amazing that you are competing for Mrs. Petite USA. So going to be all dressed up and saying like, hey, I'm rocking it. I'm rocking my feeding tube. I'm rocking my ostomy bag. Like, let's go glitter.
Yes, I'm so excited to bring that in every phase of competition as well. I think it just speaks natures to, my passion and, my service initiative too of invisible disabilities, visible awareness. And so I'm hoping that, I can showcase that in every competition and really show the judges that, hey, look, like just because I have a disability and you can see it right now doesn't make me any less valuable or deserving of this title against every other competitor. I personally don't believe that they have had a queen in Petite USA that has had a feeding tube and an ostomy bag on stage. So I'm super excited to be that representation.
Yeah, you might be a first. It'll be interesting to be able to see that. So I am I'm so glad that we had some time together. I want to give you a few minutes if there's anything that we missed or if there's anything that you'd like to kind of like remind people or summarize or kind of wrap things up. And as hard as that is, because I think this is a great conversation, we could be talking for days about it.
I think maybe just the only thing I can say that I love talking about is just, being kind to everybody that you encounter. Like, you never know what battles people are fighting silently or invisibly. And so, just be kind to everybody that you meet. Like, you don't know what they're going through. I constantly have to remind my husband of this in the car. I'm like, he has really bad road rage. And I'm like, you don't know what they're going through. Maybe they're driving to the hospital, or maybe they're just having a bad day because their grandma died yesterday, or you have no idea what they're going through. And so I'm just like, hey, I'm sorry that they cut you off, or I'm sorry that they did this, but like, just let it go. Just let it go. I'm like, it didn't hurt you. It didn't do anything to you. So, just roll with the punches, but like don't take anything too personally. And I have to remind myself of that as well, especially like with my body. As much as I want to control my health, I cannot. I cannot. I can do things that, can upset it or make it better, but ultimately, like my body chooses when it wants to be sick. And that's really disappointing because I really wish I wasn't as sick as much as I sometimes am. And so I have to, give myself grace too. Like, like as much as I want to do everything and I want to show up for people and I want to say yes, 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 because I'm a people pleaser. Sometimes, I have to give myself that grace and be like, it's okay to say no. It's okay if my body has its days where it needs some rest, or, I can't do a certain activity with my family or do this or that. Like, it's okay. Like, it's okay. Like the world's not going to end. It's not going to stop turning as much as, it feels like it in the moment. But yeah, I think just having grace and kindness with everybody is just, the key to life. And as hard as that is, because there are some difficult people in this world, like, and there are personality clashes, I will admit to that. But, I don't know what those people are doing in their lives day in and day out. I may see, this much of their life, a tiny little ounce of their life. And I just don't understand. I don't. And I will never understand anybody's life, even people who can relate to my illness. Like, just because you have my same illness doesn't mean that we've walked the same life. And even if I walked in your shoes, it would probably be totally different than what I've done in my life. Not every illness is the same either. So I guess I'll just leave you with that.
Wow, very, very powerful takeaways. And I'm just, I'm so excited that we've been brought together through the pageant world, and I'm excited to learn more from you. Of course, see you in person in July in Chicago. Yay! This has been great. Thank you so much again for coming on and providing so much so much heartfelt insights, and I love your energy, and I'm really excited to see where this goes, and see you on stage.
Yes, thank you again. And it's been so good to talk to somebody who kind of understands what I've gone through and knows some of these terminologies. It's really nice to have somebody who gets just a little bit about my life.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Same. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you found this episode inspiring, please share it with someone you never know who needs more light in their life. May this serve as a reminder that there's always darkness in the world. Do not let it consume you. Always seek the light. Please take a moment to do the good old subscribe, rate, and review. Your support means so much to me, and it helps me spread more light and love. Until next time, be kind, be loving, be human, and don't ever let anyone steal your hope.